Hello and welcome to the Extended Greg YouTube channel. I'm Greg, and today I found out that Google officially integrated programming capability into Bard. I spent a couple hours and went through it, trying some things, just seeing exactly what I could glean from it. Let me share with you what I found, so stay tuned. We're about to get extended. I started off by asking it just outright, are you able to write MicroPython? Ignore the spelling mistake. It answered in the affirmative. It said yes, it can. And it offered if it would like me to, if I would like it to, it will write some MicroPython code for me. Then I said, can you write a MicroPython script for a PyPico that connects to Wi-Fi with credentials and a secrets file, and then gets the current time via NTP on an interval, and then flashes the onboard LED toggling once every second but blinks 4 times per second for the first second of every minute. So what that would allow me to do is it would confirm that it is in fact synchronizing with NTP. It would also indicate what was the first second of the minute, so that way I can compare it against other clocks that I know are accurate and be able to make sure that it is in fact performing what I expect it to. So let's see what it did. So it said, sure, here is the MicroPython code, and it output some pretty basic code. Something important is it missed the entirety of the NTP implementation, so it was just going off of the local time. The unfortunate thing is there was no actual way for it to get that time sync in the first place. So that was a bit of an issue, and beyond that there are some other programming issues as well that I'll go over as we go through it. And I said there's no code to get the current time from NTP, and it doesn't have the capability to be able to maintain its own time, etc., etc. And also going through the pin specification that they used within this example is pin 25, but I asked it to blink the onboard LED, which the key word for that in MicroPython is just LED, in quotes. So it said, I apologize for the previous errors. Here's the corrected version of the code. So it goes through here. It adds now equals NTP time.time, which would be great, but it didn't include the NTP time library. And it did update the LED specification for the pin, but it didn't put it in quotes, so I don't know that it would actually work. And, it's something where this is an iterative process, so I'm not trying to dump all of the issues on it all at once, but just kind of cover a swath of them and just see how it handled it. So in the next part, I said, where did you get the NTP time? Where did that get imported? And it said, oh, you would just have to pip install NTP time, and then you would put in import NTP time. So what I asked is, since we just need a general reference of time, can you set the internal clock from a stripped down implementation of NTP without the external dependency, and then use the internal clock as the reference to blink the LED? Otherwise, it would make a call to NTP server each second, which would be very inefficient. So if we actually look at the code up here again, we see it's trying to look at now, and then now is referenced and checked every single second. So if now equals 0, it's going to go through and it's going to blink the LED 4 times, but otherwise it's going to go here. So it's actually going to require a response from NTP every single second in order for it to blink the LED at all. And that could be, if there's network problems, things of that nature, that could definitely cause a lot of problems. So it comes through and it defines a number of functions associated with this. So it has the set time, the get time, the flash LED, and then the main loop. So the way that it actually initializes the set time is very interesting. It spells it out, so it doesn't use any of the internal functions to be able to do it, which I'm not going to go through that because it doesn't really matter. But the get time, it's just going through the real-time clock on the machine through daytime, etc. So there's no issues there. That's not an issue. But what I did say is the function set time is never called in that script. So I actually looked through here and I did not see the set time actually being called anywhere in there. And that was in fact correct. And so it doesn't connect to the NTP server as well. Can you include a call to NTP? Also, can you initialize the onboard LED like doing this? So it didn't initialize the LED for output correctly. So I did give it the explicit code opposed to trying to coax it into the right direction. And then also using the LED variable. And actually, I got cut off here because I hit enter too soon, but it kind of got the gist of what I was saying. So it did correct that. So it added the set time function here. So first what it did is it did ntp.setTime, and that was the connection. But again, it didn't import the library for NTP time. And then it called setTime here, where it pulled from time.local. Because it looks like it's trying to set itself to itself. So some issues there, but I asked for it, a custom implementation of the NTP protocol, and then I asked it how I would do that. And it gave me a quick description of exactly how it would do that, programming languages, but it's generic. It's not really specific to the conversation that we're having. So I said, can you write me an example in MicroPython? So it actually did an okay job doing that. So what it did is it said, defined get time. It said it would create a UDP socket. Okay? First issue is that it's trying to use the machine module in order to do that, which doesn't have any kind of networking capability. It's for the physical device, like pins, things of that nature. So machine.udp does not exist. And then subsequent calls, obviously, from there are going to have issues because it wasn't initialized properly. So, the rest of it looks okay, but, I didn't get it to actually work. And I'll kind of go through some of the steps that I did in terms of trying to workshop it with Bard to ultimately try and get it to work. But so using the code you provided, can you change the set time function to only occur once before the while loop, etc.? Because right off the bat, it had it running every single loop, which would happen every second, which is something I covered earlier was not appropriate for NTP. It's something where you should initialize and synchronize an internal clock and then use that for more frequent calls and use the NTP for more generalized synchronization. So it did go through, it modified the code, it did move it above the main loop, etc. So, okay. Next, can you keep the code that is there, but add the Wi-Fi connection and credentials in a secrets file so it can access the network to get to the NTP time server? So, even though it's trying to make socket calls, things of that nature, it's not connected to any network at that point because it hasn't actually initialized the Wi-Fi. So that poses a bit of an issue and a bit of a logical gap as far as the program is concerned, because how are you going to make a network call without the network being connected? So it should have caught that, but I pointed out here. So it did give me the modified version of the code, but there's a couple of problems with this. So the first thing is that it put the Wi-Fi connectivity all the way down here. And there's also a couple of issues with that, but I'll get into that in a second. But the major issue is it's below the set time function that's supposed to call NTP and make the socket connection to be able to set the clock in the first place. So without that Wi-Fi connection already being initialized and established, there's no way that it's ever going to succeed in making that call. So I go through that. I said I tried to run it, but the machine module has no attribute UDP. So I start to get into the socket issues, things of that nature. So I actually copied this into Thony, and I actually try and run it on an actual Pi Pico, just to see what it would do. So the machine.udp. Now I do know, as I'm going through this, just take it with a grain of salt. I'm trying to lead it to come to its own correct conclusion, to correct its own code, opposed to me explicitly correcting it. And I do at some point kind of get a little bit frustrated and start correcting it just to kind of move things forward. But at this point, I'm still trying to let it correct its own mistakes. So machine.udp, right? And it says, here's the modified code. So, because I asked it to use socket instead, it does use socket. That's fine, but it doesn't import it. So the module is not included for it to make a successful call. So I said, can you import the socket statement at the top? Because obviously I'm not going to try it at that point because I know it's not going to work. So it does import the socket, import machine, time secrets, etc. All the stuff that we would expect at this point for this, at least for what we're looking at right now with the socket, but it's still missing a few things. So next thing I say is, I'm getting a value error on the sock.connect line. And then it tells me to check the NTP server. I'm like, you defined the NTP server, so realistically that's not the issue. So I did offer it some reference material as I was doing this to kind of guide it through. So I said, based on the reference material, gave it a link to the micropython.org site. I said socket.connect should use getAddressInfo as an input parameter instead of the raw URL and port. And this is a key difference with MicroPython, is it doesn't actually have the ability within sock.connect to be able to look up its own URLs. It has to already be pre-parsed for it using the getAddressInfo. So this right here was an issue. So I said instead of the raw URL, I gave it an example from that site on exactly what it should look like. And it did integrate that successfully. So it did the address info, get address info, NTP server 123, which is the port for NTP. That's not actually made up or a placeholder. And then it does the socket connect, adds the address info, and puts the index offsets here. So it was able to interpret exactly what I was saying, and it moved the indexes that were here to a lower part, which is perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong with that. So I tried again, and I say that fixed the value error, but now it's giving an OS error because it's trying to connect to the NTP server before it connects to the Wi-Fi. So that's where we approach this issue right here, where the set time is before the Wi-Fi. So I'm pretty explicit about that. I think I'm leading it quite a bit. And said, yes, I see the get time function is trying to, etc. So it provides an updated version, and what it does is it actually puts the Wi-Fi connection right at the top, which is fine. But I just will say there's no reason why it needs to actually physically be before the function itself. It could just go before the function is called. And that's usually what you would do, is you would define your functions, you would define your static variables, things of that nature, your global variables. You would define all of those, and then you would start to call things as far as regular programming structure. But there's nothing wrong programmatically with what they're doing here. It's just not usual. So I said, it says that module machine has no attribute wireless LAN. Did you mean to include and use the module network? So again, I'm leading it to try and see if it can pick up on its own mistakes, but it's using machine, which is, again, for physical I/O, not for network connectivity. And here it defined it as machine.wlan. Okay. So it outputs a new version, puts network, etc. So, and it does import it. It's already there. But it doesn't include machine anymore, which would be an issue down the line, but I actually never got to the point where I can interact with the pins or even make the LED blink using this example. So that didn't become an issue, but I just wanted to notate that here. So the next issue was it's giving an error saying the object has no attribute STA. Did you mean to use network.sta_if instead of using network.wlan.sta? And that we can see right here. So it says it doesn't have the attribute, which means it doesn't exist. So obviously it's the wrong value. It does give me a newer version that includes the statement as I depicted it, which was network.sta_if. It says that the version that it used was deprecated, and that's the reason it didn't work. But again, it has access to the information, things like that. It does seem like it's a training issue if it's using old data and not able to parse out and determine exactly what is the current working standard, especially since it's defining what that code is. So we go down here. I said it returned an error for line 10. So I referenced a line by the line number, and it says type error function does not take keyword arguments. Now, specifically what I'm referring to is the fact that it has mode equals specified here. That's what's throwing that error. So there's a keyword defined in association with the value, and that's not supported in this context. It just wants the value because it's positionally notated, not explicitly defined. So it said, I see the getTime function does not take a keyword argument. So it actually did line 14. And I call it out down here. I think you're looking at line 14. Line 10 is Wi-Fi network, blah, 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 blah. So I actually have to explicitly call it out. And the issue, it looks like it was counting only lines with text on it, which is not how coding actually works. It counts white space as far as line numbers, things of that nature. And so it got down here. This comment right here is actually line 10 as far as the ones that contain text. So I think it just jumped down to the next one. So it looks like it got a little bit confused, and I think that's something that definitely can be improved as far as communicating to be able to do this kind of troubleshooting interactively with the AI, with Bard, to be able to make it more useful. And I said it seems like it doesn't like the mode equals. So I'm pretty explicit about what the issue is here again, right? So I specifically call out which line I'm looking at, and I say it doesn't like the mode equals. And then it says, I apologize, and it stripped everything out of the arguments for wireless LAN. So technically it could work, but it poses some issues in terms of, being explicit and can throw some errors unexpectedly. So we want to explicitly define it. So I said, I'm getting an OS-EPERM error because you removed the network.sta_if parameter. So, I call it out. So it puts it back, but it includes the mode. So it didn't really know how to bifurcate those two portions of that particular example. So how to integrate the network.stay_if. So that's fine. So, and I said, my mistake, the error was on line 11, not 10. Do you have any idea what could be causing that? So really the EPERM error, so it did initialize, it did start to work, but then it came down here and it said, oh, I can't actually connect on the Wi-Fi. So that's actually what it was referring to. I correct myself here and said, I see, name error, that means variable is not defined. That is actually not the case. So it was correct in the script, but it also has a secondary meaning where it is not able to actually use the Wi-Fi connect command because of other requisites that are not in there. And I say to it, well, do you have Wi-Fi.active true, which is what's needed in order to turn the Wi-Fi on for the device. And said no is not necessary. Wi-Fi connect method will actually automatically activate the Wi-Fi connection. But I kept getting this code, and through my testing, it needed the active function. So I said line 10 works as Wi-Fi And I said, by inserting the Wi-Fi active true below line 11, it resolves the OS error. Now I'm receiving an error which is the OS -2 on line 20 because it's not able to, it's attempting to resolve the DNS address. So what I believed it was, and I know it was the case, it was something to do with establishing the connection and then just leaving it to whatever it was going to be. So it takes time to establish, especially a Wi-Fi connection. Usually there's a couple of requests, things of that nature. So typical practice is to wait for the connection to establish before you actually try and use it. In this particular case, as we can see it just kind of leaves the connection to the wind. So it doesn't have anything to wait for it or any kind of contingencies if it doesn't connect, if the credentials are wrong, for example. So that's what I'm saying to here. And then what it suggests is to set socket.setTimeout, right? Which is completely wrong, just completely wrong. And I said, that is not correct in this application. That would apply to a connection onto another machine after the network connection was already established, creating a socket connection to another machine. We need to wait for the Wi-Fi to connect by checking Wi-Fi connected, which I correct later is wrong and should be is connected. But we need to check it in a loop before proceeding. And also, we need the Wi-Fi.active true, because this is MicroPython. It does require it. It's not regular Python, which perhaps integrates it into the connect function. It says, apologize for the previous error. You are correct. The Wi-Fi connected method can be used. Now, again, I was wrong on this. It didn't catch my mistake that this does not exist as a command. So it was a little too agreeable in this particular scenario. And then, it goes through here. It still doesn't have the active equals true. So a couple issues. And then it puts here, so while not Wi-Fi connected, time sleep 1, which is fine. I do want to point out overall, the code has absolutely no console comments in there to be able to provide status when you're actually in runtime. When you're running it on the Pico, you can't tell what it's doing outwardly. And that's something I found about ChatGPT, is that it adds a lot of that type of verbose output to be able to let you know what it's doing when it's doing these types of programming implementations. So debug code would definitely be appreciated. And I said, that's better, but we still need Wi-Fi active true after line 10. And then it says, you're correct. Again, it's being very agreeable. So it does, it adds it down here instead of after line 10, because line 10 is this line here, so I'm asking it to put it before the connect statement. It adds it all the way at the bottom. And, I call it out. I say, that's line 18. It should be after this. Then I say Wi-Fi active true, and then the connect. It says, I apologize, and then it did it right. And it did it as I wrote it. But again, the idea behind the exercise is to have Bard write the actual code and not to have me write it for it. Otherwise, I could just write it myself. So, there's still a little bit, it's still an early version. And I think it will get better. This is a huge step up versus what it was. But, again, it's just one of those things where I think there's some pain points. And I just find it interesting. So it always says, I apologize for the previous error. And then at the bottom, it says, this code should now run without any errors. And I did find that interesting as far as it should say that, but it always had errors. So I think it's a little premature to be putting that at the bottom until it gets a little bit more mature, because it just sounds, it sounds arrogant if it was a person. So to me, it doesn't make any sense. But it says it doesn't throw errors anymore, but it keeps getting stuck in the getTime function. At this point, I'm just doing full debugging. So I actually went through, added a bunch of print statements, things like that to kind of find out what it is. And, I think I'm pretty much at the end of it at this point. And it says, I apologize for the inconvenience. I'm still under development. I'm always learning new things. I'm trying my best to improve my performance in the future. So I asked to submit a feedback request about my experience, and can it submit it on my behalf? And it said yes. So what I wrote is, for an initial introduction of capability, the direction of the implementation is very promising, but there are some core things that should be improved. There are routine omissions from the import statements. There needs to be recognition of line numbering to facilitate communication about errors. There appears to be conflation of method availability across modules that could be rectified with additional syntax familiarity. It might be a good idea to discourage the statement, as I said before, this code should now run without errors, etc., etc. And then there were a few instances where we would toggle back and forth about the inclusion of a keyword declaration and other examples that was given in error, and I had to explicitly define those solutions. So overall, I am very happy with how it's now progressed from where it was when the functionality was not officially supported. And I think the additional training and refinement on debugging interactions and communication, it would be easier to work around the syntaxial issues that were experienced. And I look forward to continuing to see how Bard continues to develop this skill set with extreme interest. Thank you, Bard. And it thanks me back, thanks me for my feedback, etc. So I'm definitely curious to see exactly how this shapes up and how this evolves over time as they continue to refine the tool and make it more useful for people who are trying to code but don't necessarily know all the ins and outs of how to do it. Thanks for watching the video today. If you have any ideas about ways that AI could enhance your projects, leave a comment down below. If you want to see more videos in the AI Exploration series, click this playlist right here. And also, if you like the video, be sure to hit that like button. And if you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. It helps me out a lot. And then hit that notification bell. That way you know the next time we're getting extended. So until then, take care.